and very happy to have joining us here to discuss some of this here, because we can't get into it all. That's 3 shows in a row, really, if we talk about all of Malcolm X. But to get into as much as we can, Professor Jared Ball, host of the I Mix What I Like podcast, author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, along with Todd Burrows, the editor of A Lie of Reinvention, one of the great interventions in the broader oeuvre of writings about Malcolm X, and I was honored to be a part of that. Jared, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
No, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be here. And congratulations on your $1 million mark or million subscriber mark.
Thank you.
And folks should be, folks should be encouraged to continue supporting this great platform. So thanks. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, and I hope they're also supporting I Mix What I Like. I was struggling, all day yesterday to think about what the first thing I wanted to ask you was, Jared. So I'm just going to kind of make a statement and ask you to reflect on it here. That I was thinking about reflecting on 100 years of Malcolm X, I believe 60 years since his assassination. I've had the privilege to travel all over the globe. I've had the privilege to go to many places where oppressed and exploited people are living around the globe. And there are 2 images that are omnipresent everywhere, regardless of language, culture, continent, and that's Malcolm X and Che Guevara. And everyone knows who they are. And when you see them up in a place, it's like no one is confused what it means. And I can't even honestly think of almost any other American that has that, quote unquote American, that amount of worldwide cachet. And I guess I just wanted to make that statement and have you reflect on it, because it really just kind of struck me when I was thinking about that yesterday.
No, I think it's a great place to start. The 2 were certainly indirectly in communication with one another, at least at minimum, and they were certainly connected by a similar political struggle that link, yeah.
Yeah, I could tell you right now, being in Lebanon, his face is all over here too. And Che Guevara, that's a really good point, Eugene. Che Guevara, Malcolm X, they really are these international figures that everybody knows. And in the global South, they're understood to be people who stood up against the most powerful forces in the world. And I think I don't want to jump the gun here, because I do obviously want to talk about Malcolm X's legacy. I think a part of talking about that legacy, though, is also talking about the present, because we're in such an intense moment of repression, Jared. And I think for us, this is the most repression I've ever seen in my life, at least. Not just, what we're seeing in the U.S. under, Trump recently, but in the world. We're at a real inflection point, and what we've witnessed in Gaza is just so horrific, and the way the movement for the liberation of Palestine has been treated in the U.S. is really horrific. All the crackdowns, and this is a culmination of what we've been seeing for years and years and years, with crackdowns on movements across the country, including with Black organizers. It wasn't that long ago we had one of the biggest uprisings again in my lifetime in the U.S. with the killing of George Floyd, and what we saw happen across the country then, and what came after. So I guess that's a lot to just ask. What are the kind of urgent lessons that we should be taking from Malcolm X's political trajectory? What can that offer us, especially in the moment that we're in right now, as we see the state continue to try to co-opt or increasingly crush any radical resistance that exists?
So, and part of that, which is again why I think where you both started is perfect, is the suppression of an image that is, I've been arguing, and others have, akin to what was said in another context. Malcolm is too big to fail as an image. The world had already been introduced well enough to his ideas. He made every effort in his life to link up with the rest of the world. I don't like to I rarely speculate in this way, but I think it's pretty clear, having just revisited over these last 12 weeks or so, Malcolm's life as part of this 100 Years of Malcolm X series that I've been doing at the behest of the living legend himself, Hiram Rivera. Looking at, if you look at his diaries, for instance, he would have loved to know that in today's world, he not for himself, but that his efforts to link up the struggles internationally were being recognized. He would have deeply appreciated people in Lebanon in 2025 recognizing him and recognizing what his image meant and what he meant to convey. Because as he was saying, he was learning from that part of the world and the rest of the decolonizing world what it really meant to be a revolutionary and what it would really mean for Black people to be free if that is in fact what was the desire. So it's been wildly important that every measure of propaganda and psychological warfare, counterinsurgency, however we want to describe it, neo-colonial reimposition of image and narrative, that at minimum remain the same, if not worsened in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting statement, and I mean, you know, in some ways speaks to why they killed him. I mean, it feels like that's also another important factor. I mean, you've laid all this out. I was recently, you know, rereading Carl Evans' The Judas Factor, and it's just some of the connections there between the relationship of, you know, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and African liberation movements, the CIA's Directorate of Plans that planned assassinations, the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, the way it all comes together. The fact that the preponderance of evidence is somehow like on supporters of Malcolm to prove that there is a massive conspiracy to take him down is amazing. But I actually don't want to get too detained by that, because the other thing I was thinking about in relationship to what you were saying is it is just amazing the cross currents that come through Malcolm X's life. You know, like, one, he was also a great fan and devotee of Paul Robeson, which is like never really discussed. That his father was a Garveyite, the movement that sort of J. Edgar Hoover sort of cut his teeth on destroying in Black America, and then of course becomes the agency behind COINTELPRO and the same piece to it as well. You know, he's the sort of real organizer of the Nation of Islam taking off. But interestingly enough, you look at the Nation of Islam, you know, we want the 6 southern states to secede, which looks interestingly close to the Black Belt thesis, which is maybe not surprising of a religion that came up in Detroit in the 1930s. But this is, of course, a thesis put forward by Harry Haywood, whose book Negro Liberation was funded by Paul Robeson. So it's just, you know, I could throw so many other things out there about Malcolm, but just like his Blackness, you know, and sitting at the intersection of both our the domestic and the international element of our struggle is just so amazing.
Listen, just quickly on the assassination, there's a lot to be said on that. It's important, I think, always to remember, even if the popular version and narrative is to be accepted as true, that the Nation of Islam, out of a jealous internecine battle, assassinated Malcolm, the state wanted it to happen, and no one has benefited more. The Nation of Islam didn't benefit any more than the state here, that is the political apparatus here in the United States. They benefited the most from the assassination, and it was clear that they pulled the trigger. It was definitely the goal of the United States to stop what Che was doing. So, and they benefited more than certainly any Bolivian. So let's just be clear on that. If I can, there were 3 points that I just wanted to make sure I was trying to be a little bit prepared, that I think somewhat answer what you've just said, because in doing this series, I've been encouraged to learn more or be reminded about 3 core things about Malcolm that I just want to make sure we work in here. One of which you've already touched on, but the emphasis, I think, needs to be put at least as much on his mother, Louise, who I myself included have been encouraged, like as so many, to forget was not just some falling apart, you know, breaking down woman but was herself long in the move, and how to have the OAAU be the overt apparatus of a far more deeply reaching and militant Black liberation struggle. So these are just 3 quick areas that I would encourage people to, but don't ever look too much far to the left of that as you study and re-engage Malcolm.
I'm telling you, if I could just make one point on that, which is so key, and you've been so consistent on this, by the way, about the OAU point. I mean, we should do a whole show. Maybe we'll do it on Mix What I Like. Maybe we'll talk about this on Saturdays with Renee on May 31st, where I'll be the guest. But I mean, the team he was pulling together around OAAU and ACT is like crazy when you think about the second half of the 60s. The core of the Legal Revolutionary Black Workers, who are working with Gold and other groups in Detroit, 100% down with the motion Malcolm is putting together. Obviously, we had Revolutionary Action Movement, who had already been working with him. The advanced forces that are inside SNCC are starting to look towards Malcolm in a way. You got Huey Newton and Bobby Seale on a college campus talking about, Malcolm. You got Eldridge Cleaver and Bunchy Carter in prison talking about what we do about Malcolm. So when you start to put all this together, and you mentioned many others already, and Shirley Graham Du Bois, and Kwame Nkrumah, who is looking towards Malcolm, it's like not that surprising they took him out, because so many of the most militant figures of the Black movement that like really changed the world subsequently would have been all under Malcolm's umbrella. And when you think about that, that's one of my most interesting counterfactuals. If I was a novelist, I would write about that. But I'm just saying that to co-sign your point. The last point is that last little bit has been so wiped out because the level of radicalism and the team he was putting together was so transformative that it's so suggestive that you have to push it to the side.
One quick point that I forgot to make regarding some of the history that raised Malcolm, and everything you said is exactly right. But in terms of how we might rewrite narratives, there's a certain very popular film right now that focuses a lot on the Black South. And yet not one word is said or mentioned or alluded to any of what was happening at that time in that place and in that region regarding Garvey, unions, labor movements, socialists, the Communist Party, Black armed self-defense elements. There was all kinds of things, indigenous militancy. There was all kinds of things happening around there that are somewhat erased, much like Malcolm, at least in his radical and honest form, under the guise of spectacle and Black capitalist ownership. But the only other thing I would want to add to that is that since we're doing this, is that I would very much like at some point for Rania to join us on any of these programs as well. I'm always interested in the perspective you bring to this platform and your work. And we haven't engaged enough. So that would be something else I'll just throw out there, since we're just doing that apparently today.
I like that. Throw it out there. We're going synergy. We're going 100% synergy right now. I'll answer whatever questions Renee wants to answer. But Renee, if you're watching this, May 31st, Saturdays with Renee, I Mix What I Like. Bring some of this up and let's talk more about it. But it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. Jared, I'm always looking forward to anything you do, especially when you join us here on the Freedom Side. Appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you over there on Black Liberation Media. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been great. Peace.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.